This episode is sponsored by The Botanist Kitchen. The Botanist Kitchen are an incredible company that are owned by Becky and Nathan, and they are the very proud distributors of doTERRA essential oils. And when you use a doTERRA essential oil, you are using an oil that is pure with no contaminants, fillers or adulterations. doTERRA has created an incredible essential oil. I've used essential oils for years and I have never found one as good as this. It is pure, potent, healing power in a tiny bottle, guys. And if you are a listener to this podcast, then you can head over to the website. The link is in the show notes and get your 25% off your own essential oils. So welcome to She Loves Herself, Navigating Grief season, Sarah Kerr.
Thanks very much. It's lovely to be here.
It's so lovely to have you here. I was actually just sharing with people earlier on social media that I was speaking to a death doula, and the amount of people that said to me, what is a death doula? And I'm like, actually, it's such a great question. And I only discovered it, in the last sort of 5 months. So for the listeners, Sarah, tell us who you are and what a death doula is, please.
Well, my name's Sarah Kerr, and I'm the founder of an organization called the Center for Sacred Deathcare. So we're looking at illness, death, and transformative loss, and how we can meet those experiences in our lives with more grace and confidence, and grow and learn from them rather than being broken by them, which can sometimes happen. So I'm a death doula. I've been in practice for, 10 years, 12 years, something like that. I kind of lose track. And what a death doula is. So that's not actually the clearest question, or it's hard to have a clear answer to that question. And there is a growing movement. Some people talk about it as the death positivity movement. This growing movement, primarily led by baby boomers, many of whom had their children with midwives back when they had kids, and now they're facing illness or their parents aging in death, and they want to do it in a different way. They want to reclaim death as part of life, as something that we can navigate and find our way through together. So this whole movement, of which death doulas are a part, has grown up along this. And I like to think about death doulas as people who are called to this work, but not necessarily called to participate in a palliative care, medical, social work, OT line of work. The other way you can be involved in supporting death is in the funeral industry, or maybe through the clergy. So if you have a natural propensity to be with dying people, to have that skill, there's not really anywhere else to bring it. Many of my students, and I do a lot of training, many of my students have been teased and mocked by their friends. Oh, you're the spooky one. Oh, you always want to talk about death. They often have a real sensitivity to the other worlds, and dead people aren't so far away. And they have dreams, or they have visitations, or they have some maybe mediumistic skills, or maybe not necessarily. But there's something in who they are that's drawn to support illness, death, and loss. And there hasn't really been a way to do that. So this movement is growing up. And death doulas are non-medical lay people who support people from death and dying, through death, and after death. The medical system stops at death, and then there's this gap, and then the funeral industry kicks in after that, and maybe a clergy if you're involved with that. But a death doula will start at the beginning, when you know death is coming, or maybe if it's been a sudden death, and walk all the way through. And I actually officiate the funeral as well. So take people through the whole process. I often call myself clergy for the unchurched. When people want to meet it in a spiritual way, they don't necessarily have a path for that if their spirituality is more nature-based.
I absolutely love that. And I know that might sound really random to people listening, but death is something that every single one of us will face. Yet every single one of us, well, not every single one of us, because you certainly don't, there's definitely groups of people that are okay with it, but in the main, the people around me and who I've been around and who I've grown up with, it was never talked about. And so there's so much fear, and I mean terror, from so many people around death. which then spills out to their children, which then spills out to their children. And it's this kind of way that we never talk about it, but loss of the physical is something that every one of us will experience, and I feel like if we were better prepared emotionally and physically, well, the emotions then create the physical most of the time anyway, but if we were mostly prepared for it, then do you believe like it wouldn't hurt so much? It wouldn't maybe send so many of us into that real dark place that many people can get into with grief, because they either go into that dark place, and we don't want to talk a lot of the time, we don't want to talk about it to people because we don't want to burden people with the grief. We don't want to put our grief on other people, so we hold it in. And I see this years, I've had people reach out to me and say, my dad died 7 years ago and I'm only just dealing with it now. It's hit me now because it's been suppressed for so long. Do you think that if we actually knew more of this and this was, talked about much more, it wouldn't maybe hurt so much?
I think that's really, you've hit the nail on the head. That's it. And I think in that conversation, it's important to be really clear about who we mean when we say we and us, because I'm a white woman living in Canada. All my ancestors are Scottish and Irish, right? So that's my lineage. And, those of us who have grown up in a culture shaped by dominant Northern European attitudes, right? That's the we who really doesn't know how to deal with death, or one of the we's.
Absolutely.
There are other cultures and traditions all around the world and living our neighbors who have very different cultural approaches and who have ritual practices and family skills and tools for dealing with it. So it really is a culturally determined dysfunction rather than a universal human dysfunction.
You're so right. And actually, that's my bad, because the we is us, our culture. When I was in Bali, they really celebrated death. Like they had parties and this like full ceremony. And, of course they would honor sadness, but it was like, actually, this is a celebration. They celebrated that life that existed. So they had culturally, they had an absolutely different approach to it. So there wasn't the same fear. And again, going into, to our society here, it is one of those things like, we don't talk about it. It's like, we don't talk about it. It's uncomfortable. And even, it's funny because I'm talking to you now, even with the podcast, I find myself when I'm speaking saying, this might not resonate for you right now. It's maybe something that you'll come back to, because we avoid anything like this if it's going to make us feel uncomfortable. I am talking about us, again, in this culture where we are, it's avoided because it's uncomfortable. We don't learn about it, but it's the thing that's guaranteed to happen.
Well, the other thing that's guaranteed to happen is discomfort. Right?
Yes.
As a dominant Western Northern European culture, we don't have skills for being with discomfort. We're taught to make the hard, bad things go away, and stay focused on the positive and the good and the nice and the happy and the light. And there are lots of traditions that have more skills for that. So it's really a process of learning to be present to what's true, even if what's true is difficult, because that's a natural part of life. And Buddhism teaches us that just being present to what is and not getting too worked up about the story of it, just being present. But you're so right that when we don't have teachings for it, we teach sex education in school, and we should teach death education. Everybody's going to deal with it, and it's not something that just happens to old people. So when we don't have skills for it, we don't have a place to put it in our map of the world, and more importantly, we don't have cultural structures to help us walk through it. Because when someone dies, for those of us who are still here, it's a different story for the person who's died, and we can talk about that too, but for the people who are still here, the rug is pulled out from underneath us. The structures of our lives are reorganized. Our life looked like one thing when that person was here, and suddenly they're gone. And there's this disillusionment, this dismemberment, this complete coming undone. And we need we need social structures, and ritual practices are really what those look like, to help us find our way through until we can get our feet back underneath us again. It's a coming undone and a rebuilding, like when a caterpillar goes into a cocoon, right? They come undone, they're held by the structure of the cocoon, they come out something new.
You know,
That's what ritual structures are supposed to do. There you go.
got these butterfly wings that I put up after my mum passed away. I felt like I had a bit of that, you know, chrysalis moment of really taking months of just being present, like you said, and not forcing anything and just being with all of the emotions. God, there's so much what you have said that I want to unpick. You talk about rituals. How would you create, like, if someone is and they have a diagnosis, okay, and they're dying? I must be honest, you know, I actually heard some really sad news about someone that I knew who was ages with me, and she has a diagnosis, and she doesn't have long. And I thought, that must be so scary, you know, so scary to, you know, she's a mum, her kids are young. How do you walk with someone in that space?
It's a very intuitive process, and there's not a cookbook. I mean, there are some kind of archetypal patterns that happen, but everybody meets it in a different way. Even a mom with young kids, 10 moms with young kids would have 10 different ways of what they're struggling with. The first is really understanding the soul's journey, like what is happening at a soul level in that process. And I actually have a series of courses on my website, because I teach this to every client I work with, and I thought I'm just going to put them up so that everybody can have them and they don't have to hear them one-on-one from me. So talking about what's happening as body and soul separate.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. So that's one journey. What's that separation of body and soul when soul crosses to the other side of the river, or however you envision the village of the ancestors, wherever consciousness continues? And what happens after we die? What happens? What are there's an archetypal architecture. You know, the archetypes are like our spiritual DNA, our physical DNA, our physical bodies. We understand how those work and how to meet them. We have a spiritual DNA, a spiritual structure to us, and it goes through some fairly patterns. They're not predictable, but they're similar. And so the first thing I do when I'm working with people like that is really talk to them and see where things are stuck, right? And what's not working. So when someone's dying and we know we're dying, or they know they're dying, it's an incredible gift in a way, because a sudden death is so difficult. So we have this time. How do we want to use that time to create as much beauty and love as possible? And love flows when the channels are open. So we want that's my goal with people, is how do we create as much love as possible in this system? But of course, love and grief are two sides of the same ribbon. So creating love also means making space for grief, because grief is what we feel when someone we love is dying. That's how we express our love. So I will look at, where are things stuck? Where on that energetic map is something not moving? And often in the beginning, it is something like maybe the person hasn't figured it, like there's letting it land. So sometimes you have to help the person land it. They're just in shock. And so there's some ritual work to do and spiritual work to do to help them land it. But then what often happens is that they know what's true, and they actually can tell, they know that this is really happening, and they don't have long. But their friends and family are in such shock that they can't absorb it. And so the friends and family, and also the friends and family have sort of been told that their job is to be positive and optimistic. They won't actually acknowledge, or they can't actually acknowledge, that the person is dying. And so the dying person is on this journey, and they're really isolated and alone because no one else will talk about it. Everyone says, no, you'll be here for Christmas, don't worry. Or no, don't talk about that. Of course you'll be here for this or that. And the dying person says, you know what, I might not be. And so if you can't handle this, then my journey is even more difficult, because I have to look after you. I have emotions I need to move, but you can't handle it. And so I can't talk about my emotions with you, and I have to look after you. So one of the things I first often do is a family or a community ritual, a healing circle gathering, people call it whatever people want, where we actually get everybody together. And it might be the person and their sometimes closest 10 or 15 people, family members, dear friends, and just talk about it and put it on the table. And because I can have these conversations without cringing or dancing around or speaking in euphemisms, it opens space for other people to be able to. And I explain what the dying person is often going through, which is that they feel alone and abandoned, and they're doing something really hard, and they need their friends and family with them. So the intention of that ritual is often get everybody up to speed, because we need to look at this together. We can't all be in denial because the person we love needs our help. We've got to come to terms with it. So that might be the first one. There's a whole library or menu of possibilities.
Oh, I'm going to drop the link in the show notes for those, if you don't mind, because I think that, and obviously all of your links to connect with you too, and because it's probably something that people don't think about. Like when you said a ritual, when I think of circles, I think of, sister circles, ceremonies, healing, but I never think of it as in a circle for, to connect with death. I think people are so scared that they're going to cry that they never stop. Like, I just relating it back to my own personal experience, I guess we really never accepted it with my mum at the start. Like my mum actually fought cancer for 19 years. And I do believe there was huge elements of her willingness to be here on this earth. Like she was not ready to go. Like I remember her oncologist saying to me, like, if she said, I can never call it with you, Mum, I've had her gone so many times. And there she is away on holiday again. And, she said she's phenomenal. She said, at 26 years of being an oncologist, I have never met someone like your mum. And even up until the end, and it was so sad at the end though, Sarah, because her default setting at that point was fight. And I believe her body was given everything, her soul. Like when I shared about the soul work that I did, when my soul went in to connect with her soul, there was this I was so emotional. I was in tears with it. But the message I got back, this is she didn't want to, she was still holding on. Like her soul was like, yeah, whenever you're ready, we're here. But her humanness, this ego, this fight was so hardwired. It's like, I ain't going, I'm not. And you know what? I remember her telling me, I'm terrified to death. She was so scared. And I didn't know a lot about death. And I think it's easier to talk to other people. Sometimes when it's your closest people, it's harder. I would try and say to her, I remember just a few days before she died, and she was not, she was not good, but she was just not giving in. And I was holding her hand and I said to her, Mum, it's going to be okay. You're not alone. And she's like, even then she was scared that no one was going to be there to meet her. And I knew my gran would be there and my papa, she's so loved. But this fear kept her in this shell of a body with a life that she deserved better than that, but she wouldn't give in. So she had to endure this real shit existence for a good 18 months, 2 years. That wasn't quality for her, because she wouldn't surrender. She wouldn't give in. And that was hard. And I think what I'm getting at is her fight served her so well for so many years. It was only laterally that the fight was no, and so I think there's fear for people to sit in a circle and say, right, let's accept death here, because we do hear of people, right, that get a diagnosis and then within weeks they're gone because they've just went, right, that's it, I'm gone. I'm accepting it and I'm gone. And then you get other people that fight it and they have a great quality of life for years. I don't know how exactly that works, but I do believe there has to be something surely around someone's spirit to go, no, I'm not going to give in. So perhaps that's maybe why people are scared to say, oh yeah, that's it now. Do you know?
I want to interrupt here because I don't want to leave the impression that, I mean, our attitude makes a difference, but there are people who have every single clear, true, pure desire to live and are doing everything they can and want to live. And sometimes they still die in a matter of
Yeah,
minutes.
of course.
So our attitude makes a difference, but we cannot control what's happening to the body, right? So there is something that we can do that can maybe support us moving one way or another, but we can't change that pattern.
You can't cheat death almost. Do you believe that goes back to the soul journey?
Just hang on for a second. Sorry, there's just a huge truck outside my door. I don't know. Can you hear that noise?
No.
Okay. All right. Okay. So
can't hear the thing. We can continue. That's all
okay.
right. Listen, don't worry. We have dogs barking an episode and doorbells ringing. We're keeping it real here. Yeah. Do you believe that goes back to then the soul's journey? That's like the soul's
yes.
path.
I mean, some people's destiny and fate is to live longer, and some people's is to live shorter, and some people's is to die quickly, and some people's is to die slowly.
Yeah.
You know, slowly meaning to live for a long time with an illness, perhaps. You know, and you know, I was really moved by what you said about your mom and about her fear, and that breaks my heart because it's really, in my experience, a huge lack of education. Because you know, people are often afraid of death, and if they don't have someone to talk to, some kind of spiritual director, a clergy person, someone like me, they just have this big amorphous terror. It's a big blob, and it doesn't have any distinction. It's just terrifying. And I work with a lot of people who are afraid of death, and it's really interesting to actually go into it. Say, what are you afraid of? And sometimes when people peel it back, sometimes it's like, well, I don't even know what I'm afraid of. Everybody's afraid of death, so I am too. But when you look at it, there's nothing actually. What is it? Well, dying can be difficult, and palliative care serves that. But death is different. You know, Ram Dass, beautiful teacher in this world, says death is perfectly safe. That once we leave our bodies, he also says dying is like taking off a too tight shoe. So it's a release. But, you know, your mom sounds like was worried that there wouldn't be people to meet her. Sometimes people are worried. I worked with a man who felt that he really felt that he'd failed in his life. It wasn't the case. He had many, many things to be proud of, but he was terrified to meet his father because he thought his father would disapprove. Sometimes people are afraid to meet their abusers. They don't want to leave because the abuser's on the other side. So there's a real dynamic.
And it's a real thing, right? When you think about that, my mum also said she was scared that she wouldn't get to heaven. I was like laughing. Like, my mum was amazed. She's like, yeah, but you know, what if there's one thing that I did when I was 15 or whatever, you know, all the stuff must go through your mind. Like, well, what if is like it's hell? And how do you talk to someone about that then when they're coming at you with that fear? How do you put them at ease?
Well, a big part of what I do is teach them what's in those courses. This larger map of, in Western culture, we tend to think of life as linear. Like we pop into existence, we live our lives in a straight line, and we pop out of existence. There's nothing before, nothing after. We're just this straight line floating in, I don't know what, the ethers or something. But nothing in nature is a straight line. Everything starts small, it grows, it blossoms, it dies. There's a decomposition, there's a darkness, there's an incubation period, and something new is born. So I offer people a spiritual map that involves reincarnation. It says, okay, what if we came into this world, into this body to learn things in this lifetime, then we're going to go out again, and then at some point we're going to come back in again. And what does that journey look like? So when we zoom back, and instead of seeing our lives as these little straight lines that are disconnected from anything, that start and stop, and the problem with that straight line image is that when we're done, when we die, we don't go anywhere. We vaporize, we cease to exist. and we're disconnected from community. And humans need to be connected. We need to know where we are and who we're with.
Yeah.
So
We're
when we
very
see this
attached, aren't
map,
we?
when we
Mm-hmm.
see this map that says, okay, actually you came in, learn some lessons, and you're going to go out, and this is what that journey looks like, they start to understand that there's a bigger picture and to see where it's happening. And this is really useful for the dying person. This is also useful for the friends and family, especially if there's been a really difficult death, if there's been a suicide or an overdose. What does that journey look like? And how do we hold that in the frame of this part of a larger soul's evolutionary journey? So a huge part of it is just teaching them the maps and understanding where they are on the map and giving them a framework to hold it. Because in Western culture, we don't have the shelves in the bookshelves in our head to put that information in.
Yeah.
But once we get it, there's this kind of aha, and people all the time say, oh, you've given me words for what I sort of knew, but I didn't have any way to explain or describe. So that map is a huge process. And once we understand the map, then we can do the rituals that help us move through that map.
You're amazing. I'm just like, wow, this is so amazing and so needed, because if we did understand the bigger picture, like you said, zooming out and looking in a different perspective, understanding that this isn't just it. There is so much more than this. Opening and expanding our consciousness to what's actually there, you will fear it less and understand, like, and again, what I love about what you said and what came up was, it would probably allow people on the process or to understand it before it gets to that stage, to live life fully. You know, so much of the time, and I guess you'll see this many times too, people that have regrets, you know, when they're on their deathbed, I wish I'd done it differently. I wish I didn't care about that thing, or I wish I had the courage to do that thing and follow my intuition and trust myself more and be less attached to what people thought of me. Is that a thing that, again, do you see that quite a bit?
Yeah, and there are some things you can't change at that point. There are some you can bring resolution to. Sometimes if those regrets are about how people have treated other people, then there are ways to make amends and facilitate forgiveness or apologies. Sometimes that's what needs to happen. There's a kind of cleaning up the unfinished business. Sometimes that. So if it's involves someone else, then there can often be work done around that, whether or not the other person is able or willing to be part of it. It can still happen spiritually for the person who's
absolutely dying. I absolutely can resonate with that so much. Great if you can get together, but if you can't, there's so much work that you can still do on releasing that and holding that space for yourself and those emotions. And I actually shared another episode. I remember when my dad died a few years ago, and we didn't really have a relationship with him. And he had a lot of regrets, and he was on his deathbed, and he'd asked to see my sister and I. And it was weird to go and see him, but there was just a knowing that we had to do it, you know, for all of us, because then we might have regrets that we wish we'd went and whatever, you know. But then we went, and he got to say what he wanted to say, and we literally left the room, and he passed away that night. And he needed that. I feel like he just needed that to go, you know. He'd have gone anyway, regardless, but it gave him that space just to almost exhale and just be like, right, because we said to him, you know, it's okay, like, go in peace, because everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to. I want to talk to you because you're very much, I feel like you're on my wavelength with certain things that you're saying, and around like the forgiveness part and the moving through. And something I'd love to just ask you about is when you said about moving through and coming back in again, you know, reincarnation and so on. What's your thoughts on like learning lessons in karma and things like that? Do you ever broach that subject with people around that as well?
Yeah. Yes, the understanding. I just can't let that go, though. I'm so moved by the story of what happened with your dad.
Okay.
What a beautiful gift that
Yeah.
was. And what I'm curious is how it landed for you.
It landed well, and I'm so glad I did it. It was interesting because we our first thing was we won't go because we don't want to be disloyal to my mum because he wasn't very nice, But what I've really understood during my time and my years in practicing and doing the work that I've done is that he had his lessons to learn, and understanding childhood can have a huge impact on how we grow up, and it doesn't make it right. I'm not saying, oh well, that was okay, but I also understand about karma and about lessons and about a soul's path, and I am so glad I went, because it was almost like it's not even a closing of a chapter. It just almost was like a turning of a page. It was more gentle, and it was like, I might see him again in another lifetime. We might have something in another lifetime. I believe that. So that, I guess that's why I wanted to sort of, I think like there's a lot around lessons and soul contracts, and and this might be a bit like people are listening thinking, what are you talking about? But please open your minds to this, because this will, I believe, help so many people when we understand that we take the blinkers off. We just open our minds a tiny bit to thinking, is there more? What is this? Get curious, because it's opened me up to receive things differently, to view things differently. The non-attachment piece around thinking I'm responsible, or, well, he's mine, that belongs to me. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm 43 next month. I'd say like for 36 years of my life, I was the other way. I was like, yeah, I'm a human. I am this. This is me. This is my characteristics, and this is how I'm showing up. And it's only been like, I guess not that many years that I've been doing this work, but it's changed my life. It's changed my life. And what you're saying, I feel when you're talking, it feels so gentle and safe, and like in my body, in my physical body. I'm like, yeah, this is good. This feels nice.
Yeah. Well, and I'll join you in speaking to people who this may be a little outside of their realms, that my invitation to people is to treat this as an evidence-based tradition. I talk about this as evidence-based work, and the evidence, it's a different way of evaluating. The evidence is, how does it land for you? Does it work for you? Does it bring you peace? Because we don't know. I mean, when it really comes down to it, none of us, I'm just going to say none of us died. Lots of us die and come back. Near-death experiences teach us something, and that's those experiences support these soul maps that I'm working with. But that to say nothing happens, you can't prove that. So it might be worth saying something happens and seeing what happens if we say something happens. And we don't, in my experience in dominant culture, have many other good ways to describe what's happening at a soul level other than these maps. And that, there are some lessons. You talk about lessons. I kind of stay away from karma as a concept, because I think it's such a sophisticated, complex concept in those traditions. And we throw it around here a little bit loosely, I think. But the idea that we're coming to learn lessons, and the understanding in this picture is that when we're out of a body, we make a decision about what our life is going to be here. We come in with some lessons to learn. We want to learn what it's like to live a long life, or to die in childbirth, or to be healthy or sick, or tall or short, or a victim or a perpetrator. And the goal is for each of us, the evolution of our own individual consciousness, as much as there is individual. It's a little bit of a frame, but to hold that, and that we're contributing to the evolution of the larger consciousness. So it's not that we were a perpetrator, so we come back in and we get some punishment for that. It's more like we have to learn the whole scope, and we have to try it all, and try this one and try this one. And this time, oh, well, I came in to learn what it was to live a really, really hard life. And maybe it was to die by suicide. Maybe that was the learning. Or it was such a hard life that I fell off the horse and I left, and I might come back in and learn some of these lessons again. But that's okay. We fall off and we get back on again. So the idea of lessons, and also the idea that we are, as you mentioned, traveling with a kind of core of soul. Some people call it a soul family. I like to think of it as a theater performance. There's the stage and there's backstage. And that, when we die, we go backstage and we meet all these other people, and we're like, oh yeah, I was the mom in that life and you were the daughter. Oh yeah. And then we spend our time backstage, and then when we're born, we come out again into view. And this time you'll be the dad and I'll be the girlfriend, or whatever the stories are. We put on these different roles because we can learn something, but we're doing it with the same cast of characters.
Wow, it's absolutely mind-blowing, isn't it? Like when you open yourself up to hearing something different, something different other than, and there'll be people that will be so interested in that, and there'll be people that are terrified of it. I'll just stay in my space, and that's cool. That's cool. But for me, I love the parts that I love all parts that you're sharing today, but the ones around being with someone as they're, crossing over, and inviting that into people that are maybe, going through something like that right now, to just, I guess, to hold each other, to understand that. And I guess as well, anger is okay, right? You're angry, don't suppress it, feel the emotion. I think that's a big thing as well, that a lot of people, have, especially ones that have written into me and said, that they died, and I feel like now I have these regrets, and I want to, like, what do I do? Like, how do I deal with having regret now? I give an answer, my sort of perspective on it, and then I'd love to hear yours, is that the person that's passed away isn't, they're not looking for that. They're not saying, oh, well, by the way, I'm still waiting on, I'm going to haunt you now because you did this thing. Or, I believe when someone passes, they don't have that human, again, you might have something different on it, but I like to believe that they don't have the humanness of, the ego and the anger and whatever that looks like, that even with illness, with cancer, things like that, that hopefully all of that dissipates when they pass, and they're just move into, spirit. They're not carrying the weight of the humanness with them anymore. And they're certainly not looking for perhaps forgiveness from another person, maybe. What do you think?
It's a huge, you're just really landing on a really big question. Let me see how I can describe this. So as a human living in a body, I can be and act out of my core, true, divine, patient, peaceful, I can be my best self. And I know those moments when I am, and I'm just in line, and I'm really attuned, and I'm showing up as my truest self. And I can show up in lots of other ways, right? As can all of us. So we have a whole spectrum. We can show up, operating out of our wounds and out of our ego and it's usually out of our wounds. What's happened to us has caused us to not have the skills to be able to be in that moment, that present divine space all the time, divine, our soul center. And there's a way that our ancestors and the dead are kind of the same.
Okay.
That they here our personality, ego, biography runs our show a little more. There it runs our show a little less, but it's also there. And so when we connect with our ancestors, we can connect with them and ask them to really align with their truth and light and love part of them, which all of us have. Even the worst behaving person on this side of the veil has a true love light part of them, and they can act out of that. So we can ask them to align with that, and that's mostly where they are. So when we connect with them, they're not looking back at us, I don't think, in, as you say, with that resentment. But there's also a way we can do ancestral healing work, and I facilitate something called family constellations, and this is a way that we do that, where we, and there's lots of different kinds of ancestral healing work, where we actually go back and connect with the parts of them that were wounded, and do it carefully, and do it in a way to support them. And so sometimes we do need that opportunity to say, I'm sorry to an ancestor. There is a part of them that can receive that and that is served by that, even though there's also a part of them that's completely at peace and isn't bothered by that in the slightest.
Yeah, this all makes so much sense, because a few years ago, when I did some ancestral work, there was a lot around the women and the relationships they had with men. And so when I went in, it was 4 years ago, then I did it again 3 years, maybe 2 years ago. So this all makes sense. And actually, it's nice to think that when people pass over, there's none of that. But there must be, actually, because when I did the ancestral work, there was so much pain, actually, from the women in the line around men, and sadness. And I believe, we're going off on another one here, but I believe that I'm here to change a lot of that, and to change that, and to heal through that, and to change the trajectory for that line. So that is so interesting. So I love that you do the ancestral work too. And I know that people will be listening to this like, right, that's it, I'm in. I'm gonna have to get in touch with Sarah. Because I think as well that we can carry out so much, and sometimes it's not ours. You know, sometimes we're showing up, we're like, what is this? You know, is this mine? And actually, that was happening for me. You know, I went into a real deep space, and I remember like the coach that took me through it. She was epic, and she said, "I'm getting this message, like this real, like fucking, like you hate men," and I was like, I don't hate men. I don't. She's like, look, I'm not saying it's yours, but this is really coming through strong. And I did work over like the last few years, and it was like gone way back generations of women that really struggled with, you know, unkind men. So, yeah, it's the thing.
Yeah, and we carry, if we, you know, we talked about taking a larger view, zooming back and seeing our lives coming into and out of bodies. But there's also a way we can zoom back and see ourselves as larger than just, you know, the edges of our skin and the straight line of when we pop into existence and out of existence, or pop into life. That we have individual bodies and individual selves, but we're also part of a collective body, and we have a collective self. And there are different levels of that. And one is our family. We have a family soul that we're part of, and we're part of that family system. And so when something is wrong in this part of the family system, it can show up in this part, right? If there was an injury or a wound or a rejection in one person somewhere, maybe up the line a couple of generations, it's like a mobile. You tug over here, it'll move over here. That can show up because we're trying to heal it, right? The understanding is that when a trauma happens in one generation, if it's too big for that generation to manage, or that person, or they don't have the support to manage it, or it can't be resolved, then it continues showing up in the system until it can get resolved. So we carry these things out of a loyalty sometimes to those above us in the line, and we can give it back to them or resolve it on their behalf. Well, we can't really resolve it on their behalf, but we can give it back to them, and we can separate ourselves from it, and we can support the healing that might happen up above the line. So it changes the whole system. We're not individuals, we're part of a system.
Oh, I love that. And it makes so much sense, because also then as the human version of who we are now, even though it's come from another generation, we take on behaviors based on that. So it's about then saying, right, okay, now how do I do my own healing because I've now been this certain way based on my belief system about something that actually wasn't maybe even mine. So it's like there's lots of unpicking to do. It's so incredible, all of this and how it all joins together. I could literally talk to you all day. I feel like there is so much that you have said that is so enlightening and helpful and resourceful. How can people connect with you? Like, can you tell us, are you working on anything just now? How can people work with you?
So I am on all the, all the standard social media worlds. Sacred Deathcare is the handle. I just joined TikTok and had a kind of fun viral video pop up there about saying goodbye when someone dies. How do you say goodbye? So I'm on all the places, and the website is sacreddeathcare.com. I do one-on-one work with people. So if people are struggling with something in their life, sometimes it's a death from 30 years ago that wasn't resolved. I work a lot with people navigating abortion or miscarriage. Right now, I'm working on a project about pet death, about how we support our pets at a soul level and how we support the humans in the system. Often kids are part of it. How do we navigate pet death in a soul-based way? So I'm just about to put out a course about that. I have these standing courses on my site, which are kind of resources, and they're video-based things. You can tune in, download them, and watch the process. And there's the lecture part of it, and then there's also a lot of Q&A with other people. And so that's a really fun part. There's a lot of connecting with other people. I think the biggest thing that happens in my courses is people go, oh, I'm not alone. There are other people who see the world this way. And I'm not weird, I'm not strange, I'm not wrong. I'm just living in a culture that doesn't understand or appreciate or support or give me the tools. So I work with people who are struggling with death and illness and loss, and also people who want to learn how to help others. So it's all available on my website, and I have a scheduling link. You could book a session.
I love this, and I'm going to drop all of the links in the show notes of this episode. I should have asked you this at the start, but it's just popped up. Like, what got you into this line of work?
That's a long answer, but I've always been one of those people who's super sensitive to energies and to what's felt but not necessarily seen. And it took me a long time and a lot of training and a lot of personal work to understand that and to learn how to work with it, as opposed to being, in some ways, ashamed or embarrassed of it, because it meant that there are things I can't do because I'm so sensitive. But there are things I can do because I'm so sensitive. And I learned how to do that. So that was a big part of it. My dad had a stroke about 11 years ago and lived for several years, but suddenly his death was very present. And so it was working with him through that. And yeah, I've just always been sensitive to the other worlds and dreams and the bigger picture than dominant culture usually deals with. And so it just took me a while to figure out how to use that and be of service with those skills, instead of doing what I do in spite of them and trying to gird myself to not feel these things because I didn't know how to manage it. So actually I have another course on my site called Subtle Energy Principles in Sacred Deathcare, which talks about how I work with my energy body when I'm dealing with grief and loss, and how I attune to and keep myself safe and healthy and deal with the emotions of it all. Emotions are just the energy, because it's a whole different language. So if you're drawn to those things, and if your nature is sensitivity, then it's actually a superpower for this work. There are other things you can't do. I can't do because I'm too sensitive, but this requires sensitivity and intuition and availability.
So beautiful. Thank goodness for you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share this.
Oh, but shining this light on such a topic that people are so fearful of. Even just chatting to you has, it's just opened me up more. And that was just, 50 minutes. I'm like, yeah, people, they don't need to, but I would encourage them to connect with you and with these resources and find another way of, leaning into this. And I also loved that you said, because I've been talking about this today, about being the change that you want to see in the world. Often we get very frustrated, and I talk about authenticity a lot. But I had a question from one of my coaches today, and she said, like, who are you? Like, I know who Jill Ritchie the coach is, but who's Jill Ritchie? And I was like, and I thought, well, and it threw me, and I sat with it, and I thought, sometimes I feel like I may be still dancing in old energies, that because I fully believe in the spirit, like the spirituality side, the real the somatic work, the really going into the ancestral work. Yeah, I never fully talk about it, because I'm like, oh, so am I really being my most authentic self? Or is there still a little bit of fear that, like what you said, like that's maybe holding me back from fully being? Because I'm saying I want this change in the world. I want people to see this, and I'm doing elements of it. Like I'm creating this podcast, I'm creating this series, I'm talking about it. I speak truth, I speak from the heart, but I need to be the change that I want to see in the world, and I love just listening to you. It's just perfect, as always. When we need to hear something, we hear it. And what you just said there about, all I got was, you were being the change that you wanted to see in the world. And thank goodness for you showing up.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that, and I'm glad it's been helpful.
Thank you so much for this gorgeous conversation, Sarah.
You're very welcome, Jill. Thanks for making a space to have these conversations. They're very important.